Dexro moved his long fingers across the data tablet, checking each line of text with care. The small office around him buzzed with the quiet sounds of work. Papers rustled. Other workers tapped on their screens. Everything seemed normal on this day, just like any other day in the council building, but something was different. Today, the humans were leaving. Dexro had worked as a council clerk for 30 years. He had seen many species come and go from meetings. Some got angry and stormed out. Others made long speeches about being treated badly. A few even threatened war before they left. But the humans? They were just got a quiet. Ambassador Jawan sat across from Dexro's desk. She was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes. Her hands were folded in her lap. She did not look upset or angry. She did not even look sad. She just looked tired. "These are the final papers," Dexro said, pushing the tablet toward her. "Your species withdrawal from the Galactic Council will be complete once you sign." G1 picked up the tablet and read through it slowly. Dexro watched her face, but it showed nothing. Most species made a big show when they left the council. They wanted everyone to know how badly they had been treated. They wanted to make the council members feel guilty or afraid. Not the humans. "Everything looks correct," Jawan said. She pressed her thumb to the signature pad. The tablet beeped softly. It was done. Dexro took the tablet back and saved the file. "That completes the legal process. Humanity is no longer a member of the Galactic Council. Thank you for your help," Jawan sighed. She stood up and smoothed down her simple blue dress. "You have always been kind to us." Dexro felt strange. In 30 years of work, no one had ever thanked him for processing their departure papers. Usually they were too angry to be polite. "Will you be attending the final session?" he asked. "Yes. We want to say goodbye properly," Dexro nodded. Most species skipped their final session. They were too proud or too angry to face the council one last time. But again, the humans were different. The main council chamber was huge. Hundreds of seats rose up in circles around a central speaking area. Each seat was designed for different alien bodies. Some were tall and thin. Others were wide and low. A few were filled with water for the species that lived in oceans. When Dexro entered the chamber, he saw that most council members were not paying attention. They looked at their data tablets or talked quietly with their assistants. A few were not even in their seats. This was normal for less important meetings. And apparently the human departure was not considered important. Ambassador G1 walked to the center of the chamber. Behind her came 5 other humans. Dexro recognized some of them. There was Minho, who worked on trade agreements. Yuna handled cultural exchange programs. Hansol dealt with scientific research sharing. They all looked calm and dignified. "Honored council members," Jawan began. Her voice was clear and strong, but not loud. "We come before you today to formally announce humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council." A few council members looked up from their tablets. Most did not. "For 200 years, humanity has been proud to serve alongside you," Jawan continued. "We have learned much from your wisdom and experience. We have shared what knowledge we could offer." Counselor Vextar, a tall creature with purple skin, made a dismissive gesture with one of his 4 arms. Yes. "We have your paperwork. Is there anything else?" Dexro saw Jiwan's jaw tighten slightly, but her voice remained calm. "We want to thank the Council for the opportunity to participate in galactic civilization. It has been an honor." Very nice," said Counselor Zafala, not looking up from her screen. "Safe travels," other council members murmured agreement. Some were already getting up to leave. The human departure was clearly not worth their time, but G1 was not finished. "We also want to express our hope that the Council will continue. To prosper, the galaxy needs cooperation between species. It needs wisdom and guidance." "Of course it does," said Counselor Bextel with a laugh. "That's what we provide. The Council has existed for thousands of years. It will continue long after your little species finds its way." Several other council members chuckled. Dexro felt uncomfortable. The humans had never done anything wrong that he knew of. They were just Not considered important, humans were weak compared to the Cathani warriors. They were not as smart as the Valtari scientists. They did not live as long as the Silthari. They could not breathe underwater like the Yithrin or survive in space like the Zarkan. They were just ordinary. We understand, Jiwan said. We wish you prosperity and peace. She bowed slightly, a human gesture of respect. The other humans bowed as well. Then they turned and walked toward the exit. That was it, no angry words. Threats, no dramatic speeches about being treated unfairly. They just left. Most council members had already gone back to their other business. A few watched the humans leave, but without much interest. The Xrol followed the human delegation too. The embassy levels. He was curious about how they would handle closing their offices. Most species took weeks to pack up. They fought over who would take over their responsibilities. They demanded compensation for their work. The human embassy was surprisingly small. The Xrol had never really noticed before. Other species had large, fancy embassies with hundreds of staff. The human embassy had maybe 20 people working in simple, clean rooms. Boxes were stacked neatly in the hallways. Everything was labeled and organized. Human workers moved quietly, packing files and equipment with care. "Excuse me, the Xrol said to a young human man who was sealing a box. "I'm from the council administration. Do you need help with the transition process?" The man looked up. He had kind eyes and a tired smile. "Thank you, but we're almost finished. We've transferred all our ongoing projects to other departments." "All of them?" The Xrol was surprised. Most species left their projects unfinished when they departed. "Yes, we made sure everything was properly handed over. We didn't want to leave anyone with problems to solve." The Xrol watched as more humans carried boxes toward the transport ships. They worked together smoothly, helping each other lift heavy items. No one complained or argued about who should do what work. In the main embassy office, Ambassador Jiwang was having a final meeting with her staff. The Xrol could hear her voice through the open door. "Remember, we're not leaving because we're angry," she was saying. "We're leaving because it's time for us to grow in our own way. The council has a lot. Now we need to use what we've learned." "What about the projects we were working on?" asked a woman's voice. "We've made sure they're in good hands. The medical research will continue with the Zafala Institute. The trade route analysis has been given to the Bexthal Commission. Our cultural exchange programs are being transferred to the Yethori department." "But will they really understand how to run them?" asked another voice. "They'll figure it out," Jiwan said. "They're smart people. And if they need help, they know where to find us." The Xrol realized that the humans had spent months preparing for this departure. They had not just decided to leave in anger. They had planned it carefully, making sure their work would continue without them. By evening, the human embassy was empty. The last transport ship had left for human space. The hallways that once echoed with human voices and human laughter were quiet. The Xrol walked through the empty rooms. They were clean and ready for the next species that might want embassy space. The humans had even left instruction manuals for the building's systems and maintenance, schedules for the equipment they couldn't take with them. On the main desk in the ambassador's former office, there was a small note. The Xrol picked it up and read, "Thank you for making us feel welcome. We hope the council continues to bring peace and prosperity to the galaxy. With respect and gratitude, the human delegation." That night, the Xrol went home to his small apartment. He made dinner and sat by his window, looking out at the council complex. The lights were still on in most buildings. Work continued as always, but something felt different. The corridors had seemed quieter today. The usual background noise of different species talking and working together seemed less. Maybe it was just his imagination. After all, humans had never been that important to the council. They were just one small species among hundreds. Their departure would barely be noticed. At least, that's what everyone thought. Kethmar stared at the red warning lights flashing across his control screens. 3 months had passed since the humans left, and now ships were crashing into each other in council space. Well, not exactly crashing. But they were coming much too close. Yesterday, a Veltari science vessel had missed a Cathani transport ship by only 50 meters. The day before, 2 cargo ships had to make emergency turns to avoid hitting each other near the main space station. What is happening to our traffic control system? Kethmar asked his assistant Rethaval. Rethaval looked nervous. He was young and still learning his job. Sir, the system seems to be having calculation errors. Ships are not being routed correctly through the safe passages. Kethmar pulled up the traffic management display on his main screen. Thousands of ships moved through Council space every day. They came from hundreds of different worlds, carrying people and goods to trade centers, research stations, and colony worlds. The system that guided these ships was incredibly complex. It had to track every vessel, predict where they would go, and make sure their paths never crossed in dangerous ways. For decades, it had worked perfectly. When did these problems start? Kethmar asked. About 2 weeks ago, sir. Small problems at first. Ships arriving a few minutes late. Some confusion about docking schedules. But it's getting worse every day. Kethmar frowned. 2 weeks ago was when the system had been transferred from human oversight to the Veltari engineering department. The humans had volunteered to run the traffic management system years ago. They said it was interesting work and they didn't mind the long hours. Most council species thought traffic management was boring. It was just computer work, watching screens, checking numbers, making sure everything ran smoothly. There was no glory in it, no chance for promotion or recognition. The Veltari had only agreed to take it over because someone had to do it. Get me Director Velthane, Kethmar ordered. Director Velthane arrived an hour later. She was tall and thin, with large eyes and 6-fingered hands that moved quickly when she talked. The Veltari were known as the best engineers in the galaxy. They built the fastest ships and the most advanced computers. Director Kethmar, she said with a slight bow. I understand you have concerns about the traffic system. Concerns? Kethmar pointed at his screens. Look at this chaos. Ships are nearly colliding every day. Trade routes are backed up. Passengers are missing their connections. What is wrong with your people? Velthane looked at the displays. Her large eyes moved quickly as she read the data. I see the problems. My team has been working on them since we took over the system. Working on them? What do you mean? Well, the system the humans left us is ... unusual. Velthane paused, choosing her words carefully. It doesn't follow standard engineering principles. The code is written in ways that seem inefficient, but somehow it worked perfectly when they ran it. Kethmar sat down heavily in his chair. Are you telling me that the Veltari, the greatest engineers in the galaxy, cannot operate a system that humans maintained? It's not that simple, Velthane said quickly. The human system uses prediction methods that we don't understand. It seems to guess where ships will go instead of calculating exact paths. It makes thousands of tiny adjustments every second based on patterns that aren't in any textbook. Patterns? For example, the system somehow knows that Tethani cargo pilots always take shortcuts through asteroid fields. It adjusts routes to give them extra space. It knows that Silthari diplomatic ships never arrive on time because they stop to hold meetings during travel. It plans for delays that shouldn't exist. Kethmar stared at her. How could a computer system know these things? That's what we can't figure out. The humans must have programmed it with thousands of small details about how different species behave, but there's no record of this data anywhere. It's like the system learned these things by watching ships for years and years. Rithavel spoke up from his workstation. Sir, we have another near miss. A Yithrin exploration ship almost hit a space station. They're requesting an emergency investigation. Kethmar rubbed his forehead. How long will it take your people to fix the system? Velthane looked uncomfortable. We're not sure we can fix it, sir. We've been trying to rewrite the software using our own methods, but every change we make seems to create new problems. The system is incredibly complex. It's like trying to repair a machine when you don't understand how any of the parts work together. Then what do you suggest? We could build a completely new system, using proper Veltari engineering principles. It would take about 2 years to design and test. 2 years? Kethmer stood up so fast his chair fell over. We can't have ships crashing into each other for 2 years. The alternative is to try to contact the humans who built the original system. They might be able to help us understand how it works. Kethmer felt his anger rising. Contact the humans for help? After they had left the council? It would be embarrassing. It would show that the council couldn't even maintain the systems that humans had built. No, he said firmly. The council does not ask for help from departed species. Find another solution. Valthane bowed again. Yes, sir, we'll keep working on it. After she left, Kethmer stared at his screens. The red warning lights continued to flash. Ships moved through space in patterns that made no sense. Somewhere in the system, invisible problems were getting worse every day. He pulled up the personnel files for the human traffic management team. There had been 12 of them, led by a man named Hyunsik. They had worked in shifts around the clock, monitoring the system and making adjustments. Kethmer had never paid attention to them before. They worked in a small office in the basement of the council building. They rarely attended meetings or asked for additional resources. They just did their job quietly and efficiently. Now he read their reports for the first time. Every day, they had logged hundreds of small adjustments to the system. Modified route for Sector 7 to account for Cathani pilot behavior. Adjusted timing in Zone 12 for Silthari diplomatic delays. Added buffer space around research stations. During experiment periods, each entry was signed by a human name: Hyunsik, Kyungsu, Nayeon, Jihoon. They had been watching ships and learning patterns that no one else had even noticed. At the bottom of one report, there was a note. Suggestion: increase safety margins during Veltari Festival Week. Their pilots seem more aggressive when celebrating. Kethmer realized that the humans had been studying his own species' behavior. They had known that Veltari pilots flew differently during certain times of the year. They had planned for it. A soft chime sounded from his desk. Another ship incident report. This time, a medical transport carrying emergency supplies had been delayed by 6 hours because of routing errors. People on a distant colony world were waiting for medicine that might save their lives. Kethmer looked up the colony's information. It was a small human settlement that had chosen to stay independent when humanity left the council. They were still allowed to trade with council species, but they got no help with emergencies. The medical supplies were coming from a Zephala pharmaceutical company. Under the old system, the transport would have been given priority routing. It would have arrived on time, but the new system didn't know about medical priorities. It treated the transport ship like any other cargo vessel. Kethmer picked up his communication device. Get me the Zephala Medical Authority. Yes, sir? I need to know how the humans used to handle medical emergency transports. There was a long pause. Sir, I don't think we have that information. The humans managed those protocols directly. They never submitted formal reports about their methods. Of course they didn't. The humans had just done the work without worrying about paperwork or recognition. They had saved lives by making sure emergency ships arrived on time, and they had never asked for credit. Over the next week, more problems appeared. Trade ships were arriving at the wrong stations. Passenger vessels were being routed through dangerous areas of space. Fuel costs were increasing because ships had to travel longer routes to avoid traffic jams. The council began receiving complaints from member species. Trade organizations demanded explanations. Passenger transport companies threatened to suspend service, but the worst part was the silence from human space. No complaints, no demands, no angry messages. The humans said nothing about the problems that were affecting their remaining trade routes. Kethmer realized that the humans had probably expected this to happen. They had known that the council would struggle to maintain the systems they had built, but they had left anyway, quietly and with dignity. On his screens, the red warning lights continued to flash. Ships moved through space in confused patterns. And somewhere in the galaxy, a human named Hyunsik was probably working on a completely different project. not knowing that the system he had helped create was falling apart without him. Kethmar stared at the chaos and wondered what else the humans had been doing that the council didn't understand. Dr. Zafala looked at the medical reports spread across her desk and felt sick. 6 months had passed since the humans left the council, and now people were dying across the galaxy. Not from war or disasters. They were dying from diseases that should have been easy to treat. They were dying because the medical knowledge that could save them was trapped in systems that no longer worked properly. "Tell me about the situation on Cathani Prime," she said to her assistant, Dr. Nethkal. Tentacles moved nervously as he read from his tablet. "The plague started 3 weeks ago. It affects their respiratory system? Normally, we would use the cross-species medical database to find similar diseases in other species and adapt their treatments. And the database is down. It hasn't been updated since the humans left. When we try to access treatment protocols, we get error messages." Zafala closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The cross-species medical database had been humanity's greatest contribution to galactic healthcare. For over a century, human doctors had collected information about diseases, treatments, and medical discoveries from every species in the Council, but it wasn't just a simple database. The humans had created something much more complex. They had found ways to connect medical knowledge between species that had completely different biologies. "What about Dr. Sunho's research on immunity systems?" Zafala asked. "We can't access it. The files are encrypted with human medical codes. And even if we could read them, most of the research is written in human medical language that doesn't translate well." Dr. Sunho had been a quiet human researcher who worked in the medical district's smallest laboratory. For 30 years, he had studied how different species' immune systems worked. He had discovered that many species could share immunity treatments. If the medicines were adjusted correctly, his work had saved millions of lives. When the Yithrin faced a deadly virus 2 years ago, Sunho had adapted a Veltari treatment to work with Yithrin biology. When the Silthari colony worlds were hit by a bacterial infection, he had modified Cathani antibiotics to help them, but Sunho was gone now. He had returned to human space with the rest of his species. His laboratory had been cleaned out and given to a Veltari research team. "What are the Veltari doing with Sunho's lab?" Zafala asked. "They're trying to understand his equipment, but most of it was built using human engineering methods. They can't figure out how the machines work." Zafala stood up and walked to her window. Outside, she could see the medical district where doctors from dozens of species worked together to heal the sick and injured. "At least they used to work together. Tell me about the Yithrin mental health crisis." Nethkal's tentacles drooped. "It's getting worse. The young Yithrin who are leaving their homeworlds for the first time are having severe psychological problems. Many are becoming violent or withdrawing completely. And Dr. Minji's psychological adaptation program? Closed down. The other species don't understand how it worked." Dr. Minji had been another quiet human who worked without seeking attention. She had studied how different species handled the stress of living and working with aliens. Her research had shown that many young beings suffered serious mental problems. When they first left their homeworlds, she had created support programs that helped them adapt. Yithrin youth learned to cope with air that felt different. Cathani youngsters learned to control their aggression around smaller species. Veltari students learned to slow down their thinking so they could communicate with others. The programs had worked amazingly well. For 20 years, the number of psychological breakdowns among young beings had dropped by 80%. But the programs required constant adjustment. Each species needed different types of help. The timing had to be perfect. And most importantly, the counselors needed to understand the deep psychology of multiple species. Minji had trained human counselors who could work with anyone. They learned to think like Cathani warriors, dream like Silthari artists, and calculate like Veltari engineers. They became bridges between different ways of thinking. Now those counselors were gone. Other species had tried to take over the programs, but they couldn't understand beings who thought differently from themselves. "How many Yithran have we lost?" Zafala asked quietly. 47 confirmed suicides in the past 2 months. Hundreds. More have returned to their homeworlds and refused to leave again. Zafala felt her heart's beating faster. The Yithron were a young species, just beginning to explore the galaxy. If they became afraid to leave their homeworlds, their development would be set back by centuries. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Zafala activated her communication screen and saw the face of Director Korthmal from the Emergency Medical Response Center. Dr. Zafala, Korthmal said urgently. We have a crisis on mining station Theta 7. A chemical accident has injured 200 workers from 6 different species. We need immediate medical translation protocols. Zafala felt cold. What kind of translations do you need? The miners include Cathani, Veltari, Silthari, Yithran, Zarkan, and humans. They were all exposed to the same chemical, but each species will react differently. We need to know how to treat each group. Humans? I thought all humans had left. Council space. These are independent miners who chose to stay. They're not council citizens anymore, but they're still people who need help. Zafala's hands shook as she accessed the medical translation system. This was exactly the kind of emergency that the human medical network had handled perfectly. Human doctors would have immediately provided treatment protocols for each species, adjusted for their different biologies, but the translation system showed only error messages. I'm sorry, Zafala said. The medical translation protocols are not working. We'll have to treat each species separately using their own medical methods. Doctor, that will take days. Many of these beings will die while we're figuring out the right treatments. I know, Zafala felt helpless. Send me all the information you have. I'll try to find specialists for each species. The communication ended. Zafala stared at her blank screen and realized that 200 beings might die because the council no longer had human doctors to connect medical knowledge between species. She thought about Dr. Yunji, who had run the medical translation service. Yunji had been a small, energetic woman who spoke 7 alien languages fluently. She had memorized the medical terminology of dozens of species. When emergencies happened, she could instantly provide treatment information that worked across species barriers. Yunji had never asked for recognition or special treatment. She had just done her job, saving lives by helping doctors understand each other. Now Yunji was gone, and beings were going to die because no one else could do what she had done. Over the next week, more medical crises appeared across council space. A Veltari research station couldn't treat injured Cathani workers because they didn't understand Cathani biology. A Silthari hospital turned away Yithran patients because they couldn't communicate about symptoms and treatments. The most heartbreaking case was a mixed species colony where families included parents and children from different species. When the children got sick, their non-biological parents couldn't get proper medical care for them because the medical system no longer supported cross-species family medicine. Dr. Zafala tried to rebuild the medical network that the humans had created. She sent requests to medical schools across the galaxy, asking for doctors who could learn multiple species medical knowledge. The responses were discouraging. Most species doctors only studied their own biology. They said it was too difficult to learn about other species' medical needs. Some said it was not their responsibility to treat aliens. Only a few young doctors volunteered to try. But when they began studying human medical texts, they found that most of the knowledge was written in ways that assumed deep understanding of multiple species at once. The humans hadn't just collected medical information. They had created a completely new way of thinking about medicine that crossed species boundaries. They had developed medical language that could describe treatments for beings with completely different biologies. Without that language, the medical knowledge was almost useless. Late one night, Zafala sat in her office reviewing the casualty reports. Hundreds of beings had died from treatable diseases. Thousands more were suffering because they couldn't get appropriate medical care. She opened a secure communication channel and sent a message to human space. It was addressed to Dr. Sunho, though she wasn't sure he would receive it. Dr. Sunho, she wrote, I am Dr. Zefala of the Council Medical Authority. I hope this message finds you well. We are facing medical crises that we cannot solve without the knowledge and systems your people created. I am not asking you to return to the Council. I understand why humanity chose to leave. But if there is any way you could help us save lives, many beings across the galaxy would be grateful. She sent the message and waited. 3 days later, she received a reply. Dr. Zefala, thank you for your message. I am sorry to hear about the medical problems. Unfortunately, the medical systems we created cannot be easily transferred to other species. They require a way of thinking about medicine that takes many years to develop. However, I can provide some basic treatment protocols that might help with your current emerging. Security Chief Vorthak studied the star map on his wall and counted the red warning symbols. 9 months had passed since the humans left, and dangerous situations were appearing all across the galaxy's outer regions. Pirates were attacking trade ships with no warning. Dangerous space phenomena were destroying colonies before anyone knew they existed. Entire star systems were going silent, their status unknown for weeks at a time. Show me the Outer Rim incident reports, Vorthak ordered his deputy, Kexler. Kexler activated the main display screen. Dozens of red markers appeared on the galactic map, each one representing a security problem that had emerged in the past few months. Here, Kexler pointed to a cluster of markers near the galaxy's edge. The Theta Sector pirates have destroyed 6 cargo ships in 2 weeks. No one saw them coming. No early warning signals, no distress calls until it was too late. Vorthak frowned. The Theta Sector had always had some pirate activity, but it had been manageable. Ships knew where the dangerous areas were and could avoid them or request escort protection. What about our patrol ships? Sir, our nearest patrol is 3 days away from that sector. By the time they respond to an attack, the pirates are long gone. Vorthak looked at the patrol schedules on his tablet. The Council Security Force had ships throughout the galaxy, but they focused on protecting major trade routes and important systems. The outer regions were considered low priority. How did we know about pirate activity before? Vorthak asked. Kexler hesitated. Well, sir, we relied mostly on reports from merchant ships and independent traders. They would send us information about suspicious activity or dangerous areas. And now? The reports have dropped by 70%. Most of the independent traders who used to patrol those areas were humans. Vorthak set down his tablet and stared at the map. He was beginning to understand something that should have been obvious months ago. Humans had been everywhere in the galaxy's outer regions. They were traders, explorers, researchers, and colonists. They traveled to places that other species considered too dangerous, too remote, or too unprofitable to visit. But they hadn't just been traveling for their own purposes. Without realizing it, they had been serving as the Council's eyes and ears in the most distant parts of space. Get me the files. On human merchant activity, Vorthak said. Kexler pulled up the records. Sir, there were over 3,000 registered human merchant vessels operating in Council space. They visited more than 800 different systems on a regular basis. Which systems? Mostly outer rim colonies, mining operations, research stations, and unexplored regions, places that the major shipping companies don't consider profitable enough to service regularly. Vorthak realized that human merchants like Deho had been visiting remote outposts that other species ignored. They brought supplies to lonely mining colonies. They carried messages between research stations. They traded with small settlements that couldn't afford to hire major shipping companies, and while they were doing business, they had been unconsciously gathering information. They noticed when pirates were active in certain areas. They reported dangerous space phenomena. They warned colonies about potential threats. Show me the specific routes that human traders used, Vorthak ordered. The map changed to show thousands of thin lines connecting different star systems. The lines created a vast web that covered almost the entire galaxy, reaching into every corner of space. These are just the official trade routes, Kexler explained. Human merchants also made many unofficial stops. They were known for being willing to go anywhere if someone needed supplies or transport. Vorthek studied the web of routes. It was incredibly complex, connecting systems that had no official relationships with each other. Human traders had been linking the galaxy together in ways that the Council had never recognized. What about human exploration ships? Kexler brought up another set of records. There were about 500 human exploration vessels registered with the Council. But that doesn't count the independent explorers who didn't file official reports. Such as? Well, there was Captain Soyan, who ran a small exploration ship called the Wanderer. She discovered 17 new star systems in the past 5 years. She also found 3 dangerous anomalies that could have threatened nearby colonies. Vorthek remembered reading about those discoveries, but he had never paid attention to who had made them. Captain Soyan had been just another name in the exploration. Reports, where is Captain Soyan now? She returned to human space when humanity left the Council. Her ship is probably exploring systems in human territory now. Vorthek realized that the galaxy was losing its most adventurous explorers. Humans had been willing to investigate dangerous phenomena that other species avoided. They had been curious about things that seemed unimportant or unprofitable, but their curiosity had protected everyone. When Soyan discovered a dangerous radiation field near a Veltari colony, she had warned the authorities in time to evacuate the area. When human traders noticed unusual pirate activity, they had reported it to Council security. Show me the current status of the systems that human traders used to visit regularly. The map updated again. Many of the remote systems now showed yellow or red warning indicators. What do these warnings mean? Yellow means we haven't received status reports in over a month, Kexler explained. Red means we've lost contact completely. Or there are confirmed security threats. Vorthek counted the warning indicators. There were hundreds of them, scattered across the galaxy's outer regions. How do we usually get status reports from these systems? They send them when ships visit and can carry messages back to Council space. Or they use long-range communication when they can afford it. And if no ships are visiting them anymore? Kexler looked uncomfortable. Then we don't know what's happening to them, sir. Vorthek stood up and walked to the window of his office. Outside, he could see the busy traffic of ships arriving and departing from the Council space station. But he was thinking about all the lonely outposts and small colonies that no longer had regular contact with the outside galaxy. Get me a report on the Zeta mining colony, he said. Kexler worked at his tablet for several minutes. Sir, Zeta. Mining colony has been silent for 6 weeks. The last report came from a human trader who stopped there for supplies. He said everything seemed normal. What was the trader's name? Captain Jinwoo of the merchant vessel Lucky Star. Where is Captain Jinwoo now? He returned to human space, sir. Vorthek felt a chill. Zeta mining colony had 3,000 workers from several different species. If something had happened to them, no one would know for months. Send a patrol ship to check on Zeta colony immediately, he ordered. Yes, sir. But it will take our nearest patrol ship 12 days to reach them. 12 days. If the colony was under attack or facing some other emergency, help would arrive far too late. Vorthek thought about Captain Jinwoo, who had probably visited Zeta colony regularly for years. He had delivered supplies, carried messages, and provided a link to the rest of the galaxy. The colonists had probably looked forward to his visits as a break from their isolated routine. Now Jinwoo was gone. And the colonists were truly alone. Over the next week, more problems became apparent. A dangerous space storm was moving toward a research station, but no one had noticed it because the human explorer who usually monitored that region was no longer there. A group of pirates had established a base in an asteroid field that human merchants used to patrol regularly. Most troubling of all, several small colonies had simply vanished. Their last communications had been carried by human traders months ago. Now there was no way to know if the colonies still existed, or if something terrible had happened to them. Vorthek tried to calculate how much it would cost to replace the informal surveillance network that humans had provided. The Council would need to send official patrol ships to hundreds of remote systems on a regular basis. They would need to hire scouts to explore dangerous regions. They would need to establish communication stations in distant areas. The cost would be enormous. And even with unlimited resources, it would take years to build a network as comprehensive as the one humans had maintained without anyone asking them to do it. Late one night, Vorthak received a priority message from the patrol ship he had sent to Zeta Mining Colony. "Security Chief Vorthak," the ship's captain reported. "We have reached Zeta Colony. The situation is difficult." "Explain." "The colony was attacked by pirates 3 weeks ago. Most of the population was killed or taken. As slaves, the few survivors have been hiding in the deep mines. They said they sent distress signals, but no one came to help them." Vorthak closed his eyes. "How many survivors?" "About 200, sir, out of 3,000 workers." "Did they say anything about when the attack happened?" "Yes, sir. They said it was right after the last human trader left. The pirates seemed to know that no more ships would be coming for a while." Vorthak realized that the pirates had been watching human trade patterns. They knew that Captain Jinwoo visited Zeta Colony regularly. When he stopped coming, they knew the colony was defenseless and isolated. The humans hadn't just been providing supplies and communication. Their presence had been a form of protection. Pirates and other criminals had avoided areas where human traders might show up unexpectedly now that protection was gone, and beings across. Dr. Yathori sat in her study surrounded by stacks of research papers and cultural reports. 1 year had passed since the humans left the Council, and the galaxy was becoming a lonelier place. As the Council's leading expert on interspecies social behavior, Yathori had spent decades studying how different alien cultures learn to work together. Her latest research showed a troubling pattern. Species across the galaxy were withdrawing from each other. "The numbers are clear," she said to her research assistant, Plexani. "Interspecies marriages have dropped by 80% in the past year. Cultural exchange programs are being canceled. Even simple trade relationships are becoming more formal and distant." Plexani looked up from the data tablet she was reviewing. "But why is this happening? The Council is still functioning. The major species are still cooperating on important projects." Yathori walked to her window and looked out at the Council's cultural district. The area had once been vibrant with beings from different species mingling together. There had been art galleries showing works from dozens of worlds, restaurants serving food from across the galaxy, and performance spaces where alien musicians played together. Now the district seemed quieter. Most of the galleries showed art from only one species. The restaurants had become more specialized, serving only traditional foods to their own kind. The performance spaces were often empty. "Tell me about the interspecies festival that was scheduled for last month," Yathori said. "It was canceled," Plexani replied sadly. "The organizing committee said they couldn't find enough volunteers from different species to work together." Yathori remembered the previous year's festival. It had been a wonderful celebration where beings from across the galaxy had shared their music, food, art, and stories. The event had been organized by a human woman named Yunbi, who had somehow convinced dozens of species to participate. Yunbi had been remarkable. She spoke 6 alien languages fluently and seemed to understand the cultural sensitivities of every species she worked with. She knew that Kethany preferred loud, energetic music while Sothari enjoyed quiet, contemplative melodies. She understood. The Valtari artists needed precise technical displays while Yethran artists wanted to express raw emotion. Most importantly, Yunbi had found ways to combine these different cultural preferences into events that everyone could enjoy together. "What happened to the festival organizing committee after Yunbi left?" Yathori asked. The other species tried to continue the work, but they kept having disagreements. The Cathani wanted the festival to focus on competitive events. The Sothari wanted it to be more educational. The Veltari wanted everything to be perfectly organized and scheduled. They couldn't agree on anything. Yathori wasn't surprised. Cultural events required someone who could understand and bridge different ways of thinking. Humans had been naturally good at this because they seemed to be curious about everyone else's perspectives. Show me the data on interspecies collaborative art projects, Yathori requested. Plixani pulled up a chart on the main display screen. There's been a 90% decrease in collaborative projects. Most artists are now working only with members of their own species. This was particularly sad because some of the galaxy's most beautiful art had come from collaboration between species. Yathori remembered a stunning sculpture created by a Veltari engineer and a Sothari artist, with technical advice from a human named Wanho. Wanho had been an art enthusiast who spent his free time visiting galleries and studios throughout the cultural district. He wasn't an artist himself, but he loved to learn about different species' artistic traditions. He often served as a translator, helping artists from different species understand each other's creative visions. The sculpture he had helped create was still on display in the council's main plaza. It combined Veltari mathematical precision with Sothari emotional expression in a way that moved viewers from all species to tears, but there would be no more such collaborations. Artists had retreated to their own cultural communities, creating works that only their own species could fully appreciate. What about interspecies marriages? Yathori asked. The decline is dramatic, Plexani said, showing another chart. Most of the successful interspecies marriages in the past decade involved at least one human partner. This made sense to Yathori. Humans had been unusually good at adapting to other species' cultural practices. They learned alien languages, adopted foreign customs, and seemed genuinely interested in experiencing different ways of life. She thought about Inwu, a human diplomat who had married a Sothari poet named Velsara. Their wedding had been a beautiful blend of human and Sothari traditions. Inwu had learned to communicate in the complex emotional harmonies that Sothari used for intimate conversations. Velsara had adopted human customs of physical affection and direct emotional expression. Their marriage had been successful because Inwu was willing to truly immerse himself in Sothari culture, not just learn about it superficially. He had spent years studying Sothari philosophy, art, and social customs until he could think like a Sothari when needed. Most other species weren't willing to make such deep cultural changes. They preferred to maintain their own traditions and expected their partners to adapt to them. Are there any successful new interspecies marriages since the humans left? Yathori asked. Only 3, Plexani replied. And 2 of those are already having serious problems because of cultural misunderstandings? Yathori sat down at her desk and opened a file containing her research on human cultural adaptation. She had been studying this topic for years, trying to understand why humans were so unusually good at building relationships. Across species barriers, her research had shown that humans had a rare combination of cultural flexibility and genuine curiosity about other ways of life. They didn't just tolerate differences, they actively sought to understand and appreciate them. But more importantly, humans seemed to serve as cultural bridges. When a Cathani and a Veltari had difficulty understanding each other, a human could often translate not just the language, but the underlying cultural concepts. Show me the data on interspecies business partnerships, Yathori said. Another significant decline, Plexani reported. Most business relationships are now between species that have similar cultural values. Very few partnerships cross major cultural boundaries. This was economically damaging. The most innovative and profitable business ventures had often combined different species' strengths. Cathani aggression and Veltari precision had created excellent manufacturing partnerships. Sothari creativity and Ythran exploration had led to breakthrough discoveries, but these partnerships required cultural understanding that went beyond simple business relationships. The partners needed to trust each other, communicate effectively, and work together despite having very different approaches to problem solving. Humans had often served as intermediaries in such partnerships. A human business consultant named Yamin had helped create dozens of successful interspecies ventures by serving as a cultural translator and mediator. Yamin understood that Cathani business culture was based on direct competition and strength displays, while Veltari business culture emphasized logical analysis and efficient processes. He could help Cathani partners express their ideas in ways that Veltari partners could understand and appreciate, without such cultural bridges. Most species had retreated to doing business only with others who shared their cultural values. Yathori pulled up video recordings of council social events from the past year. The differences were striking. Before the humans left, the events had been lively mixing grounds where beings from different species talked, laughed, and shared experiences together. Now, the events looked more like formal diplomatic meetings. Beings from different species stood in separate groups, interacting politely but without real warmth or connection. Look at this recording from the Science Achievement Awards ceremony, Yathori said, showing Plexani a video from 6 months ago. In the recording, scientists from different species received their awards and gave brief, formal speeches. The audience applauded politely. After the ceremony, everyone quickly separated into species-based groups and had minimal interaction with others. Compare that to the same ceremony from 2 years ago, Yathori said. Switching to an older recording, the earlier ceremony was completely different. Scientists from different species sat together in mixed groups. During the reception afterward, a human scientist named Sangwoo was facilitating animated discussions between researchers from various species. He was translating not just languages, but scientific concepts and cultural approaches to research. The earlier event had led to several collaborative research projects between species. The recent event had produced no new partnerships. It's like the galaxy has lost its ability to make friends, Plexani observed sadly. Yathori nodded. That was exactly what had happened. Humans had been the galaxy's natural friendship makers. They had the cultural flexibility to connect with anyone and the genuine interest in other beings that made those connections meaningful. She began writing her report for the Council Cultural Committee. The findings were disturbing, but they needed to be documented. The departure of humanity has created a cultural void that affects all aspects of. Trade Coordinator Bexthal stared at the economic reports scattered across his desk and felt a growing sense of panic. 18 months had passed since the humans left the council, and the galaxy's economy was falling apart. It hadn't happened all at once. For the first few months, everything had seemed normal. Trade routes continued to operate. Goods moved between worlds. Money changed hands as always, but slowly. Like a building with a cracked foundation, the economic system had begun to collapse. Show me the latest trade volume statistics, Bexthal said to his economic analyst. Grexmol activated the holographic display that showed trade flows between different sectors of the galaxy. The image was filled with red warning indicators. Trade volume has dropped by 35% in the past year, Grexmol reported. But the decline isn't evenly distributed. Some trade routes have completely shut down. Bexthal studied the display. The most dramatic losses were in routes that connected species who had historical conflicts or cultural differences. What about the Cathani-Silthari trade corridor? He asked. Completely closed, Grexmol said sadly. They haven't traded with each other in 8 months. This was devastating news. The Cathani produced some of the galaxy's finest metals and manufactured goods. The Silthari created beautiful art and luxury items that were prized throughout the galaxy. When they traded with each other, both species prospered. But the Cathani and Silthari had very different approaches to business. Cathani preferred direct, aggressive negotiations. They saw business as a form of competition where the strongest party should win the best deal. Silthari approached trade as an art form. They valued relationships, beauty, and harmony. They wanted business deals to be elegant and beneficial for everyone involved. These different approaches had always created tension, but the trade had continued because human merchants had served as intermediaries. What happened to the human trading companies that used to handle Cathani-Silthari commerce? Bexthal asked. They returned to human space when humanity left the council. The companies that tried to replace them couldn't manage the cultural differences. Bexthal remembered Wujin, who had run a successful trading company that specialized in difficult interspecies commerce. Wujin had understood both Cathani and Silthari business cultures. He could negotiate with Cathani traders in their preferred aggressive style, then present the same deal to Silthari, partners in a way that emphasized harmony and mutual benefit. Both sides had trusted Wujin because he respected their cultural values. The Cathani appreciated his direct communication and competitive spirit. The Silthari valued his attention to relationship building and aesthetic presentation. Without Wujin and traders like him, the two species had tried to deal with each other directly. The results had been predictably disastrous. Show me what happened during the last Cathani-Silthari trade negotiation. Bexthal requested. Grexmo pulled up a recording from the negotiations that had taken place 4 months ago. Bexthal watched as Cathani trade leader Vexkar slammed his fist on the negotiation table and demanded immediate price concessions. The Silthari delegation, led by artist merchant Yelinara, had been visibly shocked by this aggressive approach. They had tried to redirect the conversation toward building a long-term partnership based on mutual respect. Vexkar had interpreted this as weakness and had increased his demands. Yelinara had seen his aggression as disrespectful and had ended the negotiations. Neither side understood that they actually wanted the same thing, Bexthal observed. They both wanted a profitable, long-term trading relationship, but they couldn't communicate their intentions in ways the other side could understand. Exactly, Grexmo agreed. The human intermediaries used to translate not just languages but business cultures. Bexthal pulled up economic data for other species combinations. The pattern was the same everywhere. Species that had different approaches to business were no longer trading with each other. The Veltari, who valued efficiency and logical analysis, had stopped trading with the Ythran, who made decisions based on intuition and emotional responses. The Zarkan, who preferred formal contracts and detailed specifications, could no longer work with species that relied on trust and informal agreements. What about the smaller species and colony worlds? Bexthal asked. That's where the situation is most serious, Grexmo said, switching to a different display. Many remote colonies are facing economic isolation. The new display showed hundreds of small trading posts, mining colonies and research stations scattered throughout the galaxy. Most of them were now marked with red warning symbols. These colonies used to be connected to the main economy through human trading networks, Grexmo explained. Human merchants were willing to make runs to remote locations that larger companies considered unprofitable. Bexthal thought about Captain Jiang, who had operated a small shipping company that served the outer colonies. Jiang's ships had carried supplies to mining operations on distant asteroids, research equipment to scientific outposts, and manufactured goods to farming colonies. The major shipping companies had never been interested in these routes. The distances were long, the cargo volumes were small, and the profits were minimal. But these colonies depended on regular supply runs to survive. Where is Captain Jiang now? Bexthal asked. She returned to human space with her ships. She's probably serving human colonies now. Bexthal realized that hundreds of remote colonies were now cut off from regular supply deliveries. They could still request emergency supplies, but the cost was enormous. Many colonies were being forced to become completely self-sufficient or abandon their operations entirely. Show me the status of the Outer Rim mining operations, he said. Grex single quote up a sector map showing the locations of major mining operations in the galaxy's outer regions. More than half of them were marked as economically unviable or discontinued operations. Without regular supply runs and cargo pickups, most of these operations can't turn a profit, Grexmo explained. They're shutting down and moving their workers back to more central locations. This was catastrophic for the galaxy's resource production. The Outer Rim contained some of the richest mineral deposits and rarest materials. But extracting these resources was only profitable if transportation costs could be kept low. Human traders had kept these costs low by combining supply runs with passenger transport, mail delivery, and other services. They had created complex shipping networks that served multiple purposes on each journey. The major shipping companies couldn't replicate these networks because they focused on maximizing profits from single types of cargo. They weren't willing to make the complex, multi-purpose runs that had made outer rim mining economically viable. What about trade relationships between species that have traditional conflicts? Bextel asked. Almost completely eliminated, Grexmal said grimly. The Northic Empire and the Southern Coalition haven't traded in over a year. The Northic and the Southern Coalition had been enemies for centuries before joining the Council. Their old hatreds ran deep, but they had valuable resources that the other side needed. Human merchants had been the only traders willing to work with both sides. They had served as neutral intermediaries, buying goods from one side and selling them to the other without revealing the original source. This had allowed both the Northic and the Coalition to benefit from trade, without having to deal directly with their traditional enemies. The human traders had made good profits by serving as middlemen, and both sides had access to resources they needed. But when the humans left, this indirect trade had stopped completely. Neither side was willing to deal with traders who also worked with their enemies. The economic isolation is creating political tensions, Grexmal warned. Some species are talking about expanding their territories to gain access to resources they can no longer trade for. Bextel felt cold. If species began fighting over resources instead of trading for them, the galaxy could face wars that would make the current economic problems seem minor. He thought about all the human traders who had quietly prevented such conflicts by maintaining economic connections between hostile species. They had never been recognized as peacekeepers, but their work had been just as important as any diplomatic treaty. Get me a comprehensive analysis of the economic networks that human traders maintained, Bextel ordered. I want to understand exactly how their trading systems worked. It took Grexmal 3 days to compile the report. When Bextel read it, he was amazed by the complexity of what the humans had created. Human trading networks had connected thousands of different economic relationships across the galaxy. They had served as neutral intermediaries between hostile species, cultural translators between species with different business practices, and economic bridges between major trade centers and remote colonies. Most importantly, human traders had been willing to work with anyone. They didn't care about old conflicts, cultural prejudices, or political differences. They treated all species as potential customers and partners. This universal approach had created a web of economic connections that held the galaxy together. Species that couldn't or wouldn't deal with each other directly had been able to trade indirectly through human intermediaries, now that web was broken and the galaxy was. Prime Nexus Axtham stood at the center of the Council's greatest chamber, looking up at the empty seats that surrounded him. 2 years had passed since humanity left the Council, and now the galaxy's most powerful governing body was facing its greatest crisis in over 1,000 years. The chamber that had once held representatives from 847 different species now echoed with emptiness. More than 200 species had withdrawn from the Council in the past 6 months. Their seats sat vacant, cold reminders of a unity that was crumbling away. "Begin the emergency session," Axtham commanded, his voice carrying across the vast space. The remaining council members activated their communication systems. Those who were present in person sat in their traditional seats. Others appeared as holographic projections from their homeworlds, unwilling or unable to travel to the council station. "Fellow council members," Axtham began, "we are gathered today to address the systematic failures that have emerged since the departure of humanity. I have commissioned a comprehensive analysis of what has been called the Human Impact Assessment. The findings require our immediate attention." He gestured to his aide, who activated the main display system. Charts and graphs filled the air above the chamber, showing the decline in trade, cooperation, and stability across the galaxy. "The numbers speak for themselves," Axtham continued. "Galactic trade has decreased by 40%. Interspecies cooperation projects have dropped by 60%. Medical emergencies in outer systems have increased by 300% due to lack of cross-species medical knowledge." Councillor Vextar of the Kethani rose from his seat. His forearms moved in agitation as he spoke. "Prime Nexus, these problems existed before the humans left. We cannot blame every difficulty on the absence of one minor species. Can we not? Axum replied calmly. He directed the display to show a timeline of events. Please observe the correlation between humanity's departure and the emergence of these crises. The timeline was clear and undeniable. Most of the problems had begun within months of the human departure. The failures had cascaded from one system to another, creating a web of dysfunction that now threatened the entire galactic civilization. Counselor, Zephala's voice came through the communication system from her medical facility. I must report that the medical crisis continues to worsen. We have lost the ability to provide cross-species medical care in emergency situations. Beings are dying from treatable conditions because we no longer have the translation protocols that humans maintained. And our security situation grows more dangerous each day, added Security Chief Vorthek. Pirate activity has increased by 400% in regions that human traders used to patrol. We have lost contact with entire colonies because no one is carrying information between remote systems. Axum nodded grimly. The Human Impact Assessment reveals that humanity filled thousands of small but critical roles throughout our civilization. They served as cultural bridges, economic intermediaries, information carriers, and problem solvers in ways that we never recognized or appreciated. Counselor Bexville spoke from his position in the trade section. The economic data is particularly troubling. Human merchants maintain trading relationships between species that refuse to deal with each other directly. Without these intermediaries, many profitable trade routes have been permanently severed. But humans were never considered economically important, protested Counselor Yelinara of the Sothari. They operated small businesses and handled minor trade routes. How could their absence cause such major problems? Axum directed the display to show a complex network diagram. This represents the economic connections that human traders maintained across the galaxy. Each line represents a trading relationship. Each node represents a species or colony that depended on these connections. The diagram was staggering in its complexity. Thousands of thin lines connected hundreds of different points, creating a web that touched every corner of the galaxy. Remove the human connections, Axum commanded. The display changed dramatically. Thousands of lines disappeared, leaving isolated clusters of nodes with few connections between them. The once integrated network had become a collection of separate fragments. This is what our economy looks like now, Axum explained. Species and colonies that were once connected through human intermediaries are now economically isolated. The chamber fell silent as the council members absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Dr. Yathori's holographic image appeared in the cultural studies section. The social impact has been equally severe. Interspecies marriages, cultural exchanges, and collaborative projects have all declined dramatically. Humans served as cultural translators who help different species understand and appreciate each other. How is this possible? Asked Counselor Grexmal. Humans were not particularly intelligent or technologically advanced. They had no special abilities that other species lack. Axum had been waiting for this question. That is precisely the point. Humans succeeded not because they were superior to other species, but because they approached interspecies relations differently than the rest of us. He directed the display to show behavioral analysis data. Humans demonstrated 3 key characteristics that made them uniquely effective at building connections between species. First, they showed genuine curiosity about other ways of life. They didn't just tolerate differences, they actively sought to understand and learn from them. Second, they were willing to adapt their own behavior to work with others. While most species expect others to accommodate their cultural preferences, humans were willing to change their communication styles, business practices, and social behaviors to meet others halfway. And third, they treated all species as equals worthy of respect and consideration. They didn't base their relationships on power, intelligence, or technological advancement. They simply saw other beings as people worth knowing and helping. Counselor. Kexler spoke up from the security section. Are you suggesting that humans were somehow morally superior to the rest of us? No, Axum replied. I'm suggesting that humans had cultural traits that made them natural bridge builders. These traits may not have seemed important when we evaluated their species for council membership, but they turned out to be essential for holding our diverse civilization together. The Prime Nexus gestured to a new display showing current galactic conditions. Consider our present situation. Trade networks are fragmenting along species lines. Cultural exchanges have nearly ceased. Medical knowledge is trapped within single-species systems. Security problems multiply in regions where no one is willing to serve as neutral observers. All of these problems existed before, but humans had been unconsciously solving them through their everyday activities. They built relationships that crossed species boundaries. They carried information between isolated communities. They served as neutral parties in conflicts between species that couldn't work together directly. Counselor Vorthak leaned forward in his seat. What you're describing sounds like a form of diplomacy, but humans were never officially recognized as diplomatic specialists. Exactly, Axtham said. Humans practiced what we might call informal diplomacy. They built peace and cooperation through personal relationships rather than formal treaties. A human trader who was trusted by both the Cathani and the Selfari could maintain peaceful commerce between them even when their governments were in conflict. A human doctor who understood multiple species' medical needs could save lives during emergencies that formal medical protocols couldn't handle. A human cultural enthusiast who appreciated different artistic traditions could help species share and learn from each other's creative expressions. The chamber remained quiet as the council members considered these revelations. Many of them had never paid attention to human activities because they had seemed so ordinary and unremarkable. Counselor Zafala's voice broke the silence. If this analysis is correct, then we made a serious error in allowing humanity to leave the council. Did we allow them to leave? Axtham asked. Or did we drive them away through our indifference and dismissal? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the chamber remembered the day humanity had announced their departure. The council had barely paid attention, treating it as a minor administrative matter. The humans never complained about their treatment, observed Counselor Yelenara. They never demanded recognition or special privileges. They simply did their work and contributed to galactic civilization in their own quiet way. And when they decided to leave, they did so with dignity, Axtham added. They transferred their responsibilities to other species, completed their projects, and departed without anger or recrimination. They wished us prosperity and peace. Meanwhile, we dismissed their departure as insignificant. We assumed that any species could easily replace their contributions. We were wrong. Counselor Bexthal spoke up. What can we do now? Is it possible to restore the systems that humans maintained? Axtham sighed deeply. The Assessment Committee has studied this question extensively. The systems that humans created were based on personal relationships, cultural knowledge, and informal networks that took decades to develop. They cannot be quickly recreated through formal programs or policies. We could attempt to rebuild some of these networks using other species. 5 years had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council, and Mexrel walked through corridors that had grown quiet with the weight of unspoken regrets. The council building still functioned, but it felt different now. The halls that had once echoed with voices from hundreds of species now carried only the measured conversations of the remaining members. The energy that had once made the station feel alive had dimmed to something more like the steady hum of a machine going through its motions. Dixrol had been promoted to senior archivist, a position that gave him access to all the council's records and reports. It was a job that few beings wanted because it required reading about problems that had no good solutions. Today, he was preparing the final report on what the council officially called the human withdrawal incident. The bureaucratic language made it sound like a minor administrative event, which perhaps was how the council preferred to remember it. He sat at his desk reviewing 5 years of data, and the numbers told a story that the council members rarely discussed openly. The Galactic Council had once represented 847 different species. Today, it governed only 312. More than 500 species had withdrawn, choosing independence or joining smaller cooperative organizations that promised more effective representation. Trade volume had stabilized at about 60% of pre-withdrawal levels. The galaxy still functioned economically, but prosperity was unevenly distributed. Species that could maintain independent trade networks were doing well. Those that depended on cross-species cooperation were struggling. Medical cooperation between species had improved slightly from the crisis years, but it remained far below the levels achieved when humans had managed the interspecies medical networks. Emergency response times in outer systems averaged 300% longer than they had 5 years ago. Cultural exchange programs existed, but they were formal, scheduled events rather than the organic mixing that had once characterized galactic civilization. Most species had developed rich internal cultures while becoming more isolated from others. Security in outer regions remained problematic. The Council had established formal patrol routes to replace the informal surveillance network that human traders had provided, but the patrols were expensive and less effective. Many remote colonies had been abandoned or had become self-sufficient by necessity. Vexroll opened a sealed file that contained intelligence reports about human activities outside Council space. Reading these reports was not part of his official duties, but his position gave him access to information that few others saw. The reports painted a picture that was both encouraging and troubling for the Council's leadership. Humanity had not just survived their departure from the Council, they had thrived. Human colonies were prospering throughout the galaxy's unexplored regions. They had established trade networks, research institutes, and cultural centers that attracted beings from dozens of species. More significantly, humans had created what intelligence analysts called the cooperative. It was not a formal government like the Council, but rather a loose alliance of species and colonies that worked together on voluntary projects. The cooperative included many species that had left the Council, as well as newly contacted civilizations that had chosen to work with humans rather than join the traditional galactic government. What made the cooperative different was its approach to interspecies relations. Instead of formal membership requirements and bureaucratic procedures, it was based on mutual assistance and shared projects. Species joined specific initiatives that interested them, rather than committing to a comprehensive political alliance. The intelligence reports described collaborative research projects that were making breakthrough discoveries, trade networks that served remote regions profitably, and cultural exchanges that created genuine friendships between different species. Most troubling for the Council, the cooperative was growing rapidly. New species were joining every year, and several Council members had established informal relationships with cooperative organizations. Vexroll found a report about a human named Sungmin, who now served as a coordinator for interspecies medical research in the cooperative. Dr. Sungmin had been a junior researcher when humans were still Council members. Now he was leading projects that connected medical knowledge from dozens of species in ways that the Council had never achieved. Another report mentioned Captain Dayun, who operated a trading fleet that served over 200 colonies in the galaxy's outer regions. Her ships carried not just cargo, but also messages, passengers, and cultural exchanges between worlds that had little other contact with galactic civilization. The most detailed report was about Ambassador Minseo, who had helped establish diplomatic relations between the cooperative and 3 newly discovered species. The new species had chosen to work with humans rather than petition for Council membership, saying they preferred the cooperative's friendship-based approach to the Council's rule-based system. Reading these reports, Vexroll realized that humanity had not just left the Council. They had created an alternative that many beings found more attractive than traditional galactic government. But what struck him most was the tone of the intelligence reports. There was no indication that humans held grudges against the Council or sought to undermine its authority. They seemed genuinely focused on building positive relationships and solving problems together with their partners. The reports mentioned several instances where human organizations had provided assistance to Council members during emergencies, despite having no obligation to help. When a council research station had faced equipment failures, a human engineering team had provided technical support. When a council colony had suffered a medical crisis, human doctors had shared treatment. Protocols, these acts of assistance were provided quietly, without publicity or requests for recognition. The humans seemed to maintain their old approach of helping others simply because help was needed. Lexrol closed the intelligence files and returned to his official report. According to council procedures, he was supposed to provide an assessment of the long-term impact of humanity's departure. The truthful assessment would be that humanity's departure had revealed fundamental flaws in the Council's approach to interspecies cooperation. The galaxy had not collapsed without them, but it had become a smaller, more isolated, less innovative place. But Dexrel knew that such an assessment would not be welcomed by the Council leadership. They preferred to focus on stability and continuity, rather than on opportunities that had been lost. He wrote instead, "The withdrawal of humanity from the Council has been successfully managed with minimal long-term disruption to galactic stability. While some adjustments were required in the immediate aftermath, the Council has adapted its procedures and continues to serve its member species effectively. Current membership of 312 species represents a stable core of committed participants in galactic governance. Trade relationships and security arrangements have been restructured to reflect current membership composition. The Council continues to monitor developments in regions outside its direct authority, maintaining appropriate diplomatic relationships with independent species and organizations as circumstances require." It was all true, technically. But it was also a careful avoidance of the larger truth about what the galaxy had lost and what it might have become. Dexrol sealed the report and submitted it to the Council archives. He marked it with the standard classification: administrative, documentation, minimal ongoing impact. But that evening, as he did most evenings now, Dexrel stood at his office window and looked out at the Council station's corridors and docking bays. The lights were dimmer now, as an economy measure. Fewer ships arrived and departed each day. The restaurants and shops that had once served beings from hundreds of species now catered to a smaller, more homogeneous clientele. The station still functioned efficiently. The remaining Council members still met and made decisions. The bureaucracy still processed forms and maintained order, but something essential had been lost. The sense of unlimited possibility that had once characterized galactic civilization had been replaced by a more cautious, more limited vision of what different species could accomplish together. Dexrel thought about the intelligence reports he had read, describing human colonies where beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that seemed impossible by Council standards. He thought about the trade networks that connected worlds across vast distances, and the research institutes where different forms of intelligence collaborated to solve problems that had puzzled species for centuries. And he thought about Ambassador G1, who had stood in the Council chamber 5 years ago and wished the Council prosperity and peace. She had meant those words, and the humans had acted on them by building something better rather than trying to tear down what they had left behind. The galaxy was large enough for multiple approaches to interspecies cooperation. The Council endured, serving its members according to its traditional methods. The cooperative grew, exploring new ways for different species to help each other. But as Dexrel watched the quiet corridors and listened to the subdued conversations, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Council had chosen the path of survival rather than the path of growth. Perhaps that was